Bishop Michael Barber presents Newman's Lessons for the Church of the Third Millennium at the 2017 Newman Institute.
Thank you, John, Dr. Freed, Bishop Conley. Thank you for having me here in Lincoln. If I had to do a new motto after being bishop for 4 years, it would be, nobody tells me anything. In 2009, Pope Benedict XVI issued a surprising decree called Anglicanorum Cedibus, which was to create almost a separate rite within the Roman Catholic Church for converts coming over from the Church of England. So many Anglican bishops, priests, and whole congregations were converting. Pope Benedict wanted to make it easy for them and also allow them to bring some of their Anglican Church of England patrimony with them. They even allowed a special liturgy in the Catholic Church based on the language of the Book of Common Prayer, but on solid Roman Catholic principles to be promulgated. The first bishop of that ordinariate in the United States, Bishop Steve Lopes, his mom and dad lived in Oakland in my diocese. He's a priest of San Francisco. But one of their, say, prize converts that came over after the Church of England voted to authorize the ordination of women priests was Bishop Graham Leonard. Graham Leonard was the Anglican Bishop of London. He had a seat in the House of Lords. He was a member of the Queen's Privy Council. He was the third highest prelate in the Anglican Church after the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Archbishop of York. Bishop Graham Leonard was received into the Catholic Church and ordained a Roman Catholic priest, and his wife Priscilla was received a year or so later. Where did all of these conversions come from? Why all this sudden burst of enthusiasm? It actually started in 1833 with one sermon by one Anglican priest, and it wasn't Newman. It was Reverend John Keble, who preached a sermon in the Oxford University Church of St. Mary the Virgin. It was called the Assize Sermon. It was preached when, we would call it the Red Mass, when the courts begin. He preached this sermon to mark the beginning of the legal term. And in the Assize Sermon, John Keble was so upset. It was one of these angry sermons, like once in a while pastors do. What was he so upset about? Father Keble was upset about the interference, as he called it, of the British government and the British Parliament in matters of the Church of England, when the British Parliament had recently voted at that time to abolish hundreds of Anglican dioceses in Ireland without consulting the church. And his point in the sermon was, the church's authority is not from the government, but from the apostles. At that point, he was trying to wake up the Church of England from the time of Henry VIII when he took over the church. And then after the king and queen's power diminished, Parliament stepped in and was controlling the affairs of the Church of England. And when they abolished these bishoprics, the more conservative Anglican priests said, stop. We're founded and our authority comes from the apostles, not from you. That's something Sir Thomas More said, 400 years previous. I think, though, even the Catholic Church, we need to learn that. In the early part of the 20th century, the Austrian emperor exercised his veto of Cardinal Rampolla, who was being considered for pope in the 1903 conclave, which eventually elected Pope Pius X. So there was government interference in a Roman Catholic affair of the highest order, the choice of a pope. It was Pope Pius X, after his election, that put a stop to interference of the French, Spanish, and Austrian monarchs from interfering in the papal conclave and took away their veto. Can you imagine President Trump vetoing cardinal seepage for the next election of a pope? That sermon in 1833 began what we call the Oxford Movement, where the Anglican Church was rediscovering the apostolic origins of their church, that they were not just a department of the government. But still today, the Queen chooses and appoints the bishops of the Church of England, including the Archbishop of Canterbury. Actually, it's the Prime Minister who recommends the candidate to the Queen, and she chooses that person recommended by the Prime Minister. These appointments are published weekly in the Times newspaper of London. And so, some years ago, we had Margaret Thatcher, who was a Methodist, chose the Archbishop of Canterbury, the spiritual head of the Church of England. John Henry Newman, as a young Anglican priest, was in attendance at that 1833 assize sermon by John Keble. John Newman and John Keble and their friend Richard Hurlford became the leaders of the Oxford movement to rediscover the Catholicity of the Church of England. Newman taught then that the Church of England was part of the Church Catholic. He subscribed to a three-branch theory. In the East, the Orthodox were the Catholic Church. In Rome, the Italians, that was the Roman Catholic Church. And in England, the Church of England was part of the Catholic Church, these three branches. But the more he studied the Fathers, the more the study led him to believe that he and the Church of England were outside the Catholic Church, and he wanted in. So in 1845, the exact midpoint of his life, he died at the age of 90, he converted right in the middle. He was received into the Catholic Church by an itinerant, Passionist missionary from Italy who didn't speak English very well, Father Dominic Barbary. Father Dominic Barbary is the only saint who died on top of a bar in a pub at the Reading Railway Station. There's a blue plaque there. He's a saint. He's canonized now. He was on a train and he had a heart attack and they took him off the train and they're trying to find a place to put him down, and so they went in the pub. It was the only thing there, and the only place big enough was the top of the bar. But it was interesting that one of the greatest minds in the history of the Catholic Church, John Henry Newman, was received by someone so humble. I believe John Henry Newman is the greatest theologian in the English language, and many people agree with that. Some of his works have a lasting effect on theology today. His essay on the development of doctrine. He's also a philosopher. He wrote The Grammar of Assent. He was a fantastic homilist, which was what gave him his initial popularity all throughout England. Then he published 8 volumes of his parochial and plain sermons. Later he published another volume of his Oxford University sermons, which are his great theological tomes, Essay on Development, Grammar of Assent, condensed into sermon form. Another of his famous sermons you really got to read is The Church, a Home for the Lonely. Just leaving the topic. The Parting of Friends, his last sermon that he gave as a priest in the Church of England, and said goodbye to his congregation, and the people were crying. He also got the British Catholic bishops to cry when he preached them at their invitation a sermon as a Catholic priest called The Second Spring, when the Catholic hierarchy was restarted in England. He was a novelist. He wrote the book Callista and Loss and Gain. He's famous autobiographical author, his book The Apologia Pro Viva Sua. He was a poet and lyricist, wrote The Dream of Gerontius, which was set to music by Elgar, which have the hymns we sing today, Praise to the Holiest in the Height, and also his poem, Lead Kindly Light, made into hymns. And as a Catholic priest, he didn't write so much. He didn't even write out his sermons. He only used little tiny index cards, and we have those. He followed the practice of the day and just preached from notes, whereas an Anglican, he wrote them out, long 45-minute sermons. As a Catholic priest, one of his greatest contributions was he founded the Oratorians of St. Philip Neri. That order, he brought them from Italy to England and founded the Birmingham Oratory. The Oratorian order is the only order in the Catholic Church that I know of that since the Second Vatican Council has more than doubled its numbers. The Jesuits were less than half of what we were in 1965 today. Newman, born in 1801, died in 1890, spent half his life as an Anglican, the other half as a Catholic. He was declared blessed by Pope Benedict XVI in 2010. Another miracle is now being investigated, actually up in Chicago, for Newman to be declared a saint. When he's declared a saint, 3 popes, Paul VI, John Paul II, and Benedict XVI, have said that Newman will eventually be declared a doctor of the Church. Why? Because he's a teacher for the whole Church. And he has lessons for the Church, for us today. Why him? Because he is so balanced. On all the contentious issues facing the Church today, Newman has taken already 100 years ago some strong positions, but always with a balance and a consideration of all sides of the issue. And he will challenge your position. So, if whether you're liberal or conservative, everybody likes to quote him to back up their side without reading the other side of what he has to say. So, some of the lessons I personally take for Newman for today. The first one is the Second Vatican Council. Would Newman have been in favor of calling the Second Vatican Council? Would Newman favor Pope John XXIII or the conservative curial cardinals that advised the Pope to be cautious and said probably not a good time to call a council in the 1960s? Well, Newman was totally opposed to the calling of the First Vatican Council by Pope Pius IX. When invited by 7 bishops to come as their peritus, or personal theologian, he refused. 7 bishops said, please come to Rome with me, be my person. Think of the influence he could have had if he was there. Newman's reason was, I'm not a theologian. Well, yeah, I think he is. Why was he opposed to the calling of that Vatican Council? Why? Newman said councils should only be called in times of crisis when a doctrine or doctrines of the Church were being denied or needed to be defined. Nicaea, Chalcedon, Ephesus, Trent, the great councils, all called in times to settle theological controversies or attacks on dogma. Was anything being denied that needed to be defined and reaffirmed in 1960? The early 60s, on the contrary, were the high point of vocations and expansion of the Roman Catholic Church, especially in our country. Newman said councils have ever been times of great trial. And Newman said councils generally have 2 characteristics: a great deal of violence and intrigue on the part of the actors in them, and a great resistance to their definitions on the part of portions of Christendom. You tell me if he's correct or not. 3, Newman feared the case of calling a council in the late 1800s to discuss the definition of the Pope's temporal authority as a matter of faith. In those years, the Pope, he also owned like a third of the property in Italy, the Papal States. The Italian state was going through its Risorgimento, and the Pope's armies were losing territory as the secular Italian state was seizing papal land. Newman thought that having a council would be an overreaction to define the Pope's spiritual authority in a proposed decree on papal infallibility. But his fears were somewhat unfounded. The resulting definition was moderate, and one Newman totally agreed with. But just as the spirit of Vatican II has introduced changes in our Church never advocated by the Second Vatican Council decrees themselves, so the Ultramontane Party under Cardinal Newman of England, had a pastoral letter of 1870 giving the impression that papal infallibility was unlimited. They preached what we would now call the spirit of Vatican I. You know what I'm going to say? Or the spirit of the council that gave an exaggerated importance to the decree on infallibility. So to answer my own question, would Newman be in favor or against the calling of Vatican II? It's true that Newman was against calling Vatican I, but since it was called, and since it was indefinitely suspended by the invasion of the Papal States and unable to complete its business, the business of qualifying the dogma of infallibility, Newman said we'll have to wait for another council to balance Vatican I. Newman said the definition of papal infallibility needed to be completed. He said, let us be patient, let us have faith, and a new pope and a reassembled council may trim the boat. Newman said the dogmas of the early church were not struck off all at once, but piecemeal. One council did one thing, another a second, and so the whole dogma was built up. What looked extreme at one time needed to be explained and completed. And so it's what's been going on, at least in my lifetime. I'm 63 years old, so I remember the old church at pre-Vatican II. I remember going to Mass, the old Mass. The nuns all inhabit, had a nun in every grade in Madison Grammar School. And the church, the Mark of Peter now, in these ages, after the council, is constantly being trimmed. Pope Paul VI went one way, John Paul II another way. Pope Benedict XVI one way, Pope Francis another way. Isn't that true? Reporters always trying to ask Bishop trick questions. What do you think of Pope Francis doing X? Put you on the spot. My answer always is, if the current Pope is fat, the next Pope will be skinny. Newman would have been in favor of calling Vatican II to balance and complete Vatican I, but he would not be in favor of everything that has flowed from the time of Vatican II. His prediction has come true. A council unleashes a time of great upheaval. Second lesson. Do we need a church? Why don't we just stay home and read the Bible? So many young people say, I'm spiritual, but I don't need a religion, and I don't need a Catholic church with all its rules and everything. You do that around kids today. I ask a lot of kids in the Navy and Marine Corps, what's your religion? Oh, my parents are Catholic, or I was raised Catholic, but I'm not practicing anything. Newman's got a great response to this. He discovered for himself the visible church when he converted from evangelicalism to high church Anglicanism. He grew up as a Bible Christian, reading the Bible. He was read to him by his grandmother. And then when he was at Oxford as a young fellow, the other fellows there educated him. And they taught him this. Do you believe the Bible is an infallible book? He said, yes. And then they said to him, then an infallible book needs an infallible interpreter. Newman was taught that the Bible was not meant to teach Christian dogma, but to prove it. The Bible was meant to be in the hand of a teacher. That's because the teacher and the preaching came first, and the Bible was only written many years later to be in the hand of that teacher. Newman also discovered the sacramental principle, that the sacraments actually do something. They convey a grace and a power in someone. Prior to that, he held the evangelical understanding, which is, well, you believe? Okay, then we'll baptize you. That the faith came first and then the baptism later. That it was just an effect of something already. Newman learned, no, the baptism actually gives you grace. And when he became a young Anglican priest, he was written up and condemned in the newspapers because he refused to marry a couple in the Church of England because one of the members had not been baptized. And that was the only way you could get married then. There was no going to the courthouse, whatever its own religious. So Newman discovered we absolutely need a church because it's the church that guarantees and interprets the correct teaching of the Bible. Next lesson, 3. Is development of doctrine necessary? People said, how can the church, the Catholic Church, teach in 1840 something that it did not teach explicitly in 840? That's so. The Roman Catholic Church in the 19th century had a definition of Our Lady's Immaculate Conception. If you ask Thomas Aquinas, do you believe in the Immaculate Conception? Thomas Aquinas did not hold it. Okay? That doesn't mean it's not true, but Thomas Aquinas is not the whole church. Okay? It needed time to develop. And that is, you can see it very well in Christology, with the councils. Some people said, well, who is Christ? He's the Son of God. Okay? Well, once you decide that he's Son of God, but he's also God and man, then you can ask the next question. Who is Mary? Is she just mother of the human part of Jesus? Or no, Mary is the mother of Jesus. Jesus is God and man, therefore Mary is mother of God. But you see, there were hundreds of years in between each definition. As the church prayed, thought, deliberated, and used the gift of reason assisted by the Holy Spirit on her decrees and dogmas to find out all the implications, to make explicit what was implicitly held at the beginning. So, new questions arise in the light of revelation and tradition. Can women be ordained? Would that be a true development of doctrine, as some say, or a rupture or corruption? Can the church bless gay relationships? Can divorced and remarried Catholics receive Holy Communion? Is the church against the death penalty in all circumstances? These are issues that are considered in the light of the decree on the development of doctrine. So, the church has changed its position once in a while. For example, when it comes to usury, the charging of interest on a loan. Once it was forbidden, now it's allowed. It was judged to be a true development. The thing is, Newman said, the church needs to be the infallible authority to distinguish between true and false development. Newman said, in a higher world it is otherwise, but here below, to live is to change, and to be perfect is to have changed often. But most people neglect to quote the preceding sentence. Doctrine changes with external circumstances in order to remain the same, not to be something different. Pope John the 23rd said the same thing at the opening of Vatican II. The council was called not to change doctrine, but doctrine may need re-expression in modern times. What is the essence of a teaching, and what in the teaching is tied to the language of the time it was defined? For example, transubstantiation. If you ask St. Peter, 12 apostles, do you believe in transubstantiation? They would not know the term, correct? But if you ask them, do you believe that the Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ? Absolutely yes. St. Paul teaches it right there. The church, based on Thomas Aquinas, used a philosophical or a metaphysical term to describe the mystery of faith. A term from the Aristotelian metaphysics of Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. Some people say today, is there a better term to describe the mystery today? Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI said no, so we should hold on to that. There's nothing better yet on the horizon. Obviously, people say and think that antiquity is more important, but not so, Newman says. Antiquity is not the most important criteria. And I think this could be very helpful, especially to understanding the current situation of the church on the liturgy. Some people say that the further something moves from its source or origin, the more likely it is to lose its original character. Newman insists, no. It is indeed sometimes said that the stream is clearest near the spring, but Newman says it's not true of philosophy or belief. On the contrary, Newman says, it's more equable, more pure, and stronger when the stream, its bed, has become deep and broad and full. It necessarily rises out of an existing state of things and for a time savors of the soil. Its vital element needs disengaging from what is foreign and temporary. So, the Sacrosanctum Concilium, the decree on the liturgy of Vatican II, called for certain minor adjustments to the Mass of the time. Use of the readings in the vernacular. Then Archbishop Bugnini, who was in charge of implementing revisions of Sacrosanctum Concilium, said, I think we should not use the Missal of Pius V as our guide. Let's go back to the early days of the church, see what they were doing then in the liturgy, and do it today in 1965-69. So that is a violation of Newman's principle, you see. Newman would say we should very much consider all the developments that have taken place in theology and also in the liturgy down through the centuries as the work of the Holy Spirit, is the work of the guidance of the church, and not throw those away in favor of going all the way back. Where would we be if we throw out the decrees of the Council of Chalcedon and Nicaea and Ephesus to go back to a purer time? Wouldn't make sense. You see, the church's understanding of its doctrine has gotten clearer the longer the ages have gone on. I think that should be applied to the liturgy as well. We apply it to all the other fields of theology, but not the liturgy right now. Newman had rules for his teaching on the doctrine of development. How do you know if something's a true development? Should women be ordained? Or, thing on the death penalty of Pope Francis has proposed just a couple days ago. Well, there are 7 tests. I'll just list them, but you need to have a little mini course on development of doctrine to understand and then apply each one. The tests are taken from St. Vincent of Laurent, a French theologian. Preservation of type, continuity of principles, power of assimilation, logical sequence, anticipation of its future, conservative action upon its past, chronic vigor. All those things. Newman said, take those, apply them to your question, and see if your development is true or if it's false. Catholics are not like Mormons. Now, that's one of the big differences. We believe that the canon of Revelation was closed with the death of the last apostle. The Pope just can't wake up and think up a new doctrine. We don't believe that. Which you can in the Mormons. The Mormon president in Salt Lake, he's a prophet and a seer, and an example was 1980s when blacks were not allowed to become priests in the Mormon church, and they had a lawsuit that was against the Boy Scouts, because to be a Boy Scout leader, you had to be a priest in the Mormon church. I mean, you're a priest in the Mormon church when you're 12 or 13, and all the men are usually priests. And the Mormon president had a vision or revelation and changed the doctrine. The lawsuit went away. Okay, you see, they have an ongoing revelation. We don't. Okay? So when Newman wrote his essay on the development of doctrine, he argued himself into the Catholic Church. And it's an unfinished book. As soon as he got to a certain point, and and saw that the things being taught by the Catholic Church in his day in 1845 were still implicitly taught or held in the early church, he converted. Another lesson for the church today is Newman on conscience. I know Bishop Conley's written a nice article in the journal First Things on Newman and conscience. Newman is, when people hear Newman talk on conscience, they usually say, oh yeah, that came up in 1968 with Humanae Vitae, when people that didn't want to follow the papal encyclical were told by their priest, well, if you don't like what the Pope says here, just follow your conscience, which means, usually, do whatever you want. You know, that's, that happens a lot. I say, I don't like church teachings, so I'll follow my conscience and just do what I want. Now, Newman said, that is not what conscience means, to just do whatever you want. What happened? Where did Newman develop his theory on conscience? It was 1874. William Gladstone lost the election as Prime Minister. He blamed, Gladstone did, his loss on the Pope's influence on Ireland. Gladstone had attacked the decrees of Vatican I, the decree on papal infallibility, and he wrote a pamphlet against it. And Gladstone claimed that Queen Victoria's Roman Catholic subjects were no longer loyal citizens of England. Because of Vatican I, they had transferred their moral and mental freedom to the Pope. In the United States, we had the same accusation. The Know Nothing Party in the U.S. said that Catholics are subjects of a foreign power, the Pope, and not true citizens of the United States. Cardinal Manning, in reading Gladstone's pamphlet, which had wide circulation, Cardinal Manning was an Archbishop of Westminster, the Catholic Diocese in London, asked Newman to respond to Gladstone in writing. And Newman's response was, well, thanks a lot. You set the house ablaze and leave it to others to put out the flames. Because Manning was the one saying, oh yeah, you know, the Pope is supreme in everything. He's infallible on all things, you know. And so Newman wrote his famous letter to the Duke of Norfolk. And in that letter, he has the famous phrase, certainly if I am obliged to bring religion into after-dinner toasts, which indeed does not seem quite the thing, I shall drink to the Pope, if you please, still to conscience first, and to the Pope afterwards. So, a lot of people use that to say, conscience comes before papal authority. That's not what he meant it to be. He thought, Newman did, that there could not be a conflict between conscience and papal or church authority, because conscience and papal authority are all coming from the same source, that is God. Conscience, Newman said, is the primordial vicar of Christ. Conscience is an echo. An echo implies a voice, and the voice is speaker external to itself, and that voice is God. Let me give you an example. Mother tells the little boy, you may not have a cookie before dinner. It'll ruin your appetite. The little boy waits till his mother's out of the kitchen. He takes a chair, he climbs up, he opens the cookie jar, he eats a cookie, he puts it all back. No one saw him. But the boy in his conscience feels guilty. He feels something. Why? Because he knows someone saw him. That feeling, that echo in him, you did something wrong. And he can't be at peace with it. We get that if you have a good conscience and you violate a commandment or something, you don't feel at peace. There's an echo there. That echo implies a voice. That voice is speaker. And that speaker is God. You see. So Newman would even use his example of conscience to help prove the existence of God. Because you do feel it, even when you do something wrong that no one sees. Cardinal Ratzinger says, conscience and truth go together. Conscience can never be used as a defense of the autonomy of the person. Both conscience and authority bear a direct relation to external truth as their middle term. Conscience may err, definitely, people can err in following their conscience. But Newman said, I've always contended that obedience even to an erring conscience was the way to gain light. It can err. That's why we're under the obligation to have an informed conscience. Not just, I don't want to hear the argument against it, I form my opinion. We have to have an informed, educated, and open conscience. Pope John Paul II quoted Newman in Veritatis Splendor. Although each individual has a right to be respected in his own journey in search of the truth, there exists a prior moral obligation, and a grave one at that, to seek the truth and to adhere to it once it is known. The Pope continued, as Cardinal John Henry Newman, an outstanding defender of the rights of conscience, forcefully put it, conscience has rights because it has duties. Conscience has a duty to seek the truth, not just to do as the individual wishes. And so ecclesiastical authority also has duties. The ecclesiastical authority must be strictly defined and limited. Newman was afraid that at Vatican I, if they defined the Pope's infallibility, that there would be an infallible statement served up every morning with your morning paper at breakfast. Newman said the Pope has to be extremely conservative in use of ecclesiastical authority, especially infallibility. Therefore, Newman would not be in favor of the definition of new Marian doctrines that have been under discussion the past 10 years. Mary is mediatrix of all graces. Mary is co-redeemer, co-redemptrix. He'd be against the definition of those. He didn't say be against the belief in those. It was an optional belief. They say that Pope John Paul II wanted to define Mary as mediatrix of all graces and co-redemptrix. It was Cardinal Ratzinger, as his doctrinal chief, that held him back and said, no, don't use your big guns for this. Those doctrines are not being attacked. They don't need to be defended and defined at this time. Newman dedicated his life to the defense of dogmatic religion and of a living, infallible teaching office. But he also criticized the overuse of autocratic church authority and ecclesiastical power politics. The bottom line, Newman could not imagine ecclesiastical authority based on and interpreting revelation and conscience coming into direct conflict, because both have the same author, who is God, and God does not contradict himself. Next lesson Newman can teach us is about the role of the laity in the church. There was an English Monsignor working in Rome that didn't care for Newman at all. His name was Monsignor Talbot. And Monsignor Talbot wrote a letter to the Archbishop of Birmingham against Newman. As an example of his defense of the laity, in a notorious incident following the failure of Newman's attempt to found an oratory in Oxford as a Catholic chaplaincy for the students, Ultramontanists, both in Rome and in England, attacked Newman. Newman was supported in an open letter signed by 200 leading British Catholics, including all the Catholic members of Parliament and nearly all the Catholic peers. You know, Catholics were not allowed by the Catholic Church to go to Oxford University. The Anglican University of Oxford allowed Catholics to study there, but you could not get a degree unless you professed the 39 articles. So people would study there, get an education, but they never got the degree. Cardinal Manning and other Catholic bishops in England thought Catholic students would lose their faith if they went to a secular university like Oxford. Newman said no, that their faith would be enlightened and challenged him on that. And Newman wanted to found an oratory there to take care of any Catholic students that would attend the university in violation of the bishop's creed. So you can see why there was division on this. In fact, Catholic students weren't allowed to get degrees until in the 1900s. And the Catholic Church response on the bishops was, okay, well, we'll allow Catholics to go there, all right, they can get their degrees, but we got to put a special Catholic chaplain there. And we got to make all the students not only go to Mass on Sunday, but they have to go to an additional lecture on their, to reinforce their Catholic faith on apologetics, and will also be required of Catholic students. And so for years and years and years at the Jesuit parish of St. Aloysius in Oxford, which is the parish church, there was a huge sign there that said, students of Oxford University, your attendance at Mass here on Sunday does not fulfill your Sunday obligation. Imagine that. They had to go to the university chaplain's Mass, have a special sermon, and stay on for the extra lecture. That only came down very recently. The university chaplains still get mad that students go to that parish. This was from the returns. But anyway, back to Monsignor Talbot. Monsignor Talbot was an English curial official in Rome, enemy of Newman, and he said in an hysterical outburst that if a check be not placed on the laity of England, they will see the rulers of the Catholic Church in England instead of the Holy See and the Episcopate. Laymen are beginning to show the cloven hoof. And then Talbot delivered his most famous lines. What is the province of the laity? To hunt, to shoot, to entertain. These matters they understand, but to meddle with ecclesiastical matters they have no right at all. Dr. Newman is the most dangerous man in England, and you will see that he will make use of the laity against your grace. Wow, that's pretty strong. That's what you got. That's what Monsignor Talbot said. Newman said, well, I want a laity that are not arrogant, not rash in speech, not disputatious, but men and women who know their religion, who enter into it, who know just where they stand, who know what they hold and what they do not hold, who know their creed so well that they can give an account of it, who know so much of history that they can defend it. I want an intelligent, well-instructed laity. That's over 100 years before Vatican II. And to put his belief into practice, Newman founded the Catholic University of Ireland. Okay. He founded the Oratory School in Birmingham. He bought land and intended to found an oratory at Oxford, pending the admission of Catholics to Oxford. And he wrote his famous treatise on consulting the faithful in matters of doctrine. In this book, or treatise, long letter, on consulting the faithful in matters of doctrine, Newman quoted history. He said at the time of the Arian heresy, the faithful maintained orthodoxy, while a bishop erred and expelled Athanasius. There was one few times in history where the laity kept the orthodox teaching while the bishops erred. And so a huge row ensued. Newman was deleted for heresy by the Bishop of Newport in England because Newman was accused of making the laity into the magisterium. And Newman wrote back and he said no. He was very specific about the meaning of the word consult. When we hear that, on consulting the faithful in matters of doctrine. So that to me sounds like, okay, should we have ordination of women? Let's take a vote. Okay, we take a vote all around the Catholic Church. The higher vote wins. That's not what Newman said by consulting the laity. Tell me your opinion. This is what he said the word consulting is. Thus we talk of consulting our barometer about the weather. The barometer only attests a fact of the state of the atmosphere. In like manner, we may consult a watch or a sundial about the time of day. A physician consults the pulse of his patient, but not in the same sense in which his patient consults him. It is but an index of the state of his health. You see that? You see the difference there? The doctor consults you. How do you feel? How's this? How's that? And you consult the doctor for an expert opinion on what's wrong with me. It's two different uses of the word consult. Newman's using the word to consult the faithful, to establish the fact of what they believe, not to seek their advice. And we had a good example of it in the mid-19th century when Pope Pius IX wrote to all the bishops of the church before he defined the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. Pius IX asked the bishops of the world, do your faithful believe in the dogma of the Immaculate Conception? So is it believed in Europe? Is it believed in Asia? Is it believed in America? You know, that's what he meant by the, see that? Father Ian Carr, the great Newman scholar, says, on consulting the faithful means not just the lay, but pastors and religious as well, the whole body of the church. And so, Newman's letter on consulting the faithful in matters of doctrine echoes what Vatican II said in Lumen Gentium. Vatican II said, the body of the faithful as a whole, anointed as they are by the Holy One, cannot err in matters of belief. See, he was ahead of his time. The next lesson. Don't worry, it's almost over. Liberalism in religion. This is one of my favorite ones for today. Newman was against the spirit of liberalism in religion. By that, he doesn't mean that he liked Gregorian chant more than a guitar mass. You know, not liberal conservative. It means something else. It means something like this. In the Navy, as a chaplain, we're not allowed to touch a weapon. Okay, we're a non-combatant. And therefore, we have a bodyguard assigned us at all times. A sailor or marine who follows you all around, and he always is there. And when you're sleeping in the pub tent, it's the two of you and his rifle is between you there. And whenever you're saying mass or counseling someone or you're on a hike with the Marines, your bodyguard is right behind you and he's always ready to protect you. So I had this bodyguard in the Navy, and we were on a mission in Thailand with the Marines and the Royal Thai Marines. And I think we were going to bed or whatever, and he took off his shirt and I saw that he had two giant tattoos on his chest. On one chest he had, in all color and detail, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and on this chest he had the Immaculate Heart of Mary. You know, just like you see it in beautiful pictures. So that's really fantastic. You know, the heart is red and blue and the swords. And I said, are you Catholic? And he says, well, my family's Catholic, and I got these to please my grandmother. And I said, I'm sure she really likes them. But then, when we were in Thailand, the Thai Marines took us one day, you know, we were doing war games and exercises with them. But we had a day off, and they said, we want to show you some of the famous temples. So we go in all these Buddhist temples that are all beautifully carved and statues and things. And it was very, very fascinating to go through these treasures, beautiful places. Well, this young man, he comes out, and when we were on the tour of the temple, he saw a statue of the monkey god and a statue of the elephant face god. And he goes, I'm going to have those two tattooed on my back. And I said, don't do that. We'll cancel out all the graces you can. But it kind of correctly points out where a lot of people are too. And this is what Newman was against. That there's no truth in religion. That it's just a matter of opinion or preference or sentiment. Newman's fantastic speech he gave toward the end of his life when he was named Cardinal. And he had to give a speech in Rome when he received the official decree from the Pope, you've been nominated a cardinal. He made this response called the bigliettos, which biglietto means a ticket. You know, he got the card. And he says in this, I rejoice to say, to one great mischief I have from the first opposed myself. For 30, 40, 50 years, I've resisted to the best of my powers the spirit of liberalism in religion. Never did Holy Church need champions against it more sorely than now, when, alas, it is an error overspreading as a snare the whole earth. And on this great occasion, when it is natural for one who is in my place to look out upon the world, and upon Holy Church as in it, and upon her future, it will not, I hope, be considered out of place if I renew the protest against it which I have made so often. Then he defines it. Liberalism in religion is the doctrine that there is no positive truth in religion, but that one creed is as good as another. And this is the teaching which is gaining substance and force daily. it is inconsistent with any recognition of any religion as true. It teaches that all are to be tolerated, for all are matters of opinion. Revealed religion is not a truth, but a sentiment and a taste, not an objective fact, not miraculous, and it is the right of each individual to make it say just what strikes his fancy. Hasn't that come true today? That it's just, in fact, many people now go further than that, especially out where I live in California, and say that religion is the source of evil and war and division and hatred in the world, just because people hold to their faith with conviction and with belief. We had a huge ecumenical ceremony. It took us a year to prepare in my diocese, organized by the Sant'Egidio group that came out from Rome to help us. And we got Jews, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, everybody to come together for a common ceremony and declaration of peace. And we had some preparatory meetings, and some of the religions were, I don't know if I can be part of this, or why should I cooperate? And I got up and I said, hey, we're not doing this because we're pretending we have things in common. Each religion is different, has its own truth. But we have to make a common statement to say together to the world that religion is a source of peace and not a source of division and anger and hatred. And by having just such a common ceremony and declaration, we disprove all our attackers, because we can put something together and show we do care about the world, and that we're all in favor of peace. So that teaching of Newman, I think, really needs to be reinforced today, especially when the state is more and more encroaching on religion and saying religion doesn't have a public voice. You only have freedom of religion inside your church with the door closed. Therefore, you don't have a voice to preach and speak your religion out in the public square. Out in California, Silicon Valley, a Catholic who worked for Mozilla Firefox, that browser you got, the head of that was found out making a donation against the gay marriage initiative, which we had a ballot initiative in California, some years ago, which by the way passed. People said we should not have same-sex marriage. That was the vote. He was found out making that donation to the Christian side. He was immediately fired. They said, we don't want someone who discriminates on our working in our country out of a job for exercising his religion and his voice by making a donation to this. Pope Benedict XVI, when he went to England for the beatification of Cardinal Newman in 1990, was invited to give a speech in Westminster Hall, where St. Edmund Campion and Thomas More had their trials and were condemned and sent off to the Tower and then executed. It's amazing that the Pope of Rome was invited to preach on that same spot. And where the Pope was were plaques on the ground saying, here's where Edmund Campion and Thomas More stood during their trial. Pope Benedict XVI gave a speech there to all the members of Parliament and all the prime ministers. And his theme was, religion is being excluded from public life and discourse as merely one's opinion, which must be kept private. That there's no truth in religion, no place for religion, no place for religious celebrations. And Pope Benedict spoke out with Newman's voice against that tendency in modern society. The headline the next day in the London newspapers, Pope defends Christmas. So just happy holiday, Christmas. The Pope said, this is why I would suggest that the world of reason and the world of faith, the world of secular rationality and the world of religious belief need one another and should not be afraid to enter into a profound and ongoing dialogue for the good of our civilization. Pope Benedict said that, and Pope Francis has picked it up. So those are my lessons. Be careful in calling ecumenical councils. Vatican III, right around the corner. That's happening. We need a church. We need that church. You can't just stay home and read the Bible. We need a church because only through it can we receive Holy Communion and the other sacraments. We need a church in order to teach us faithfully and truly what Christ taught us. We need development of doctrine as a foundational theological principle to maintain true teaching in the church. But the 7 tests and nodes of development must be properly applied. We need to explain and defend the importance of conscience, but not conscience as meaning just do what you want. We need to recognize the role that the laity have to play in matters of doctrine. And when different organs of ecclesiastical authority, teachers say something, if it causes great disturbance or lack of peace in the church, that means something. Because you folks are under inspiration of the Holy Spirit in your work, as are the teachers in theirs. And we need to know that religion is about truth, not just a matter of sentiment or opinion. And also, just to pass, as a Jesuit who's taken the 4th vow of special obedience to the Pope, I want to quote what Newman said. Even though he had all sorts of arguments and objections to this and that Pope, defining this, doing that, acting politically, they said, Newman, do you want to go back to being an Anglican? Do you ever regret you became a Catholic? You know, you're in all these controversies. He said, deeply do I feel, ever will I protest, for I can appeal to the ample testimony of history to bear me out, that in questions of right and wrong, there is nothing really strong in the whole world, nothing decisive and operative, but the voice of him to whom have been committed the keys of the kingdom and the oversight of Christ's flock. The voice of Peter is now, as it ever has been, a real authority, infallible when it teaches, prosperous when it commands, ever taking the lead wisely and distinctly in its own province, adding certainty to what is probable and persuasion to what is certain. Before it speaks, the most saintly may mistake, and after it has spoken, the most gifted must obey. All who take part with Peter are on the winning side. Thank you very much. We have time for questions. Questions, objections?
Could you clarify for me what Newman means by the word
Conscience. Conscience is the aboriginal vicar of Christ. It is that voice within you that says, do this, don't do that. It's that voice that, especially when it comes to a moral matter, if you do something wrong, it won't give you peace. That's why people want to go to confession. That's why people send in anonymous money orders to the tax department every year in IRS when they have cheated their taxes, because their conscience won't let them be at peace. That's what it means, an interior release. And then people say, well, how do you know you're not just talking to yourself? Well, then you see if this voice is true or not by comparing it with external authority. Am I obeying the law? Am I obeying the commandments of Christ? Did I cheat on my taxes? The taxes, you got to pay this.
How does he justify that? I got mixed up in that whole section. How does he justify that in that properly with actual conscientious objections to what the Pope would say?
So it goes both ways. He said the things the Pope teaches with authority are coming from God, and they're coming from revelation. So what does the scripture and the tradition teach? What has the church always taught on this subject everywhere where people held? That we can hold to be true. So that if your conscience is disagreeing with divine papal authority, then examine your conscience. Seek clarification. This is going on a lot right now. I mean, I had a lot of students say, Father, I don't see what's wrong with like homosexual, relationships and stuff. I've tried, I've looked at this, but it just doesn't seem wrong to me. And these were good church-going people. This is not a crazy person. And said, well, well, read this, look at that, reflect on the commandments. See if you're being swayed by common opinion. Just like people were swayed in Germany at the time of Hitler, the Jews were no good. So how did they allow all those Jews to be killed? Thomas Aquinas says, conscientia semper sequendum, conscience must always be followed. Hitler followed his conscience and all those millions of Jews died. So you got to make sure it is in line with the external authority. So if it's not, then you got to do your best. But also it is on the ecclesiastical authority. Recognize Newman says, if your people everywhere in the church are upset at something you're proposing, maybe that's coming from the Holy Spirit in their consciences, and you must take that into consideration before you sign, seal, and declare a new stage in the development of doctrine. And that's kind of going on in the church right now, things right on that. It's amazing to me how, when Pope John Paul II issued one and then another letter on the ordination of women. The first one wasn't as strong or as well thought out as the second. So people are always putting to the Pope, make it more clear. The reasons don't seem to, do your homework, but he had to say something because for the first time in history that doctrine was being attacked. I don't know, I'm talking a lot around what you're saying, but yeah. But I would say it goes the other way. So, some priests have said to me, well, if people come up to go to communion and they're in a second marriage, they haven't had one, say they're divorced and remarried, it's being talked about now, and they feel in their conscience they can go to communion. Some priests have said to me, in my conscience, I don't feel I can give them the Holy Communion. And there's an item in canon law that said no priest is obliged to administer a sacrament against his conscience. Sometimes that happens with marriages. A couple go to the pastor to get married, and there is no impediment in canon law, but the pastor just feels, knowing them, that they're just not ready or it's not going to work. He could say, there's no canonical thing, I can't, but I just feel I can't do it. You got to go ask the next priest. He just feels in his conscience, it wouldn't be right for me to do it. So it goes the other way too. Conscience will affect certain priests. So that ecclesiastical authority has to take that into account. Is there peace in the church? Yes?
I was really interested on your discussion about how as the church develops with time, and how it's not always in its best interest to go back to the original source, or you're giving the example of how to do the liturgy and how to do the Mass. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Okay, yeah. For example, when I talked about the Christological decrees, so people said, who is Christ? And I had to work out how to explain the mystery. Again, we're trying to put in human language of something that is mysterious, that is above us, which is the whole incarnation. Okay, God becomes man. How do you figure that out? Because we're not God's way of human. So the church had to say, how do you define who Christ is? He's fully divine, fully human. They use the term hypostatic union. One person, two natures. Okay, that took a lot of time. So if you go back and ask Peter and John and Andrew, hypostatic union, two natures. But we do believe he's the Savior. We do believe he's the Son of God. We do believe he's the Son of Mary. You see what I mean? But as time goes on, we're getting more explicit of something that was implicitly believed, as more the church reflects on it with the benefit of the Holy Spirit. So things are getting clearer and more understanding the more time goes by. And then we understand more about Mary, based on who Jesus is. We talk about Mary. And that's how you have Immaculate Conception way down and defined in 1854, I think it is, 1,854 years after our dating. But the truth of it was always held from the beginning, maybe implicitly, that she, because of who her son was kept free from sin, so that she could be the Ark of the Covenant. You see, so now let's go to the liturgy. And so some people have said, Well, in the early church, the priests faced the people, or they did it this way and that. And then through time, the priests faced that oriented. And then there became a communion rail. And then there became Gregorian chant. You know, then there became pews, and then there became kneeling. You know, then there became feast days. You know, all of that, we say, is emphasizing and making better and more clear and more reverent what was going on at the beginning. And all done for a very good theological reason, to support the teaching. Kneeling for communion, receiving on the tongue and not on the hand. They said, no, in the early church they received on the hand. Let's go back to here. Well, receiving on the tongue came in for a very good reason. You see, kneeling for communion, to support the theological belief of what was going on. So that's why I'm saying, why do we say, well, we're going to follow development of doctrine for all the other fields of theology, but when the liturgy comes, no, throw that away, we're going to go back to the beginning. No, I don't think that makes sense. I think to be consistent, and the thesis that needs to be written now is the application of development of doctrine on the developments of the liturgy. Plus there's the huge question, is what we have now what the actual decree of the Vatican II said in the Sacrosanctum Concilium? It seems Sacrosanctum Concilium said this, and then something grew out of that that is not connected with that. That Archbishop of meeting his committee kind of took great liberties in it, but was signed off by the Pope. But the fact that the Church is still not exactly at peace with this, Benedict XVI wrote his spectacular book, The Spirit of the Liturgy, which I hope in time by another Pope will be made into an encyclical. That is a great healing effect. And he's raising the question, I think. Not only am I raising this, I spoke with the head of the Department of Pastoral Liturgy at Notre Dame University over here in South Bend. He was in the same court. He said a lot of the young people, they're not in one camp or the other. You know, Vatican II Mass versus extraordinary form. He said, I don't like both. He said, why can't we have both? So I think a new generation will arise. In my diocese, one priest asked me, can I say Mass at Orienna? I said, yeah. Pope Benedict says you can give it a try, see if it increases your attendance and stuff, and it has. Other priests wanted to scratch his eyes out. Put it in the priest council. Anyway. Struck that from the record. It's the principle. It's the principle. Yes, sir.
Going back to conscience, I was interested in your answer to Newman sanctifies the conscience by attaching it to God's influence on humanity. How would you respond to someone who approaches that as, well, the conscience is simply a neurological development that occurred through evolution to allow humans to be better at socializing?
Well, it's the same kind of thing as we believe in the soul, and some people say there's no soul. I mean, it's something that exists. I can show the effects of it. Certainly for the existence of the human soul, the best way I've found to prove its existence to children is you ask them to bring in pictures of their grandparents from all the different stages of their life, when grandma was a baby, grandma was first communion, grandma got married, grandma. And so, wow, looks like a different person, Is that you, grandma? Yeah, it's the same me, but the body has changed and changed and changed. Cells have redeveloped, but it's the same me. So we can prove the existence of something immaterial by showing its effects. I would say the same with consciences. And you see the effects when people deaden their conscience or ignore it. That's why you have shootings and all sorts of crimes and stuff. People that had so deadened their conscience or ignored it. And there's an awful lot of remorse in prisons, and people that are not at peace, even after they serve their sentence, unless they have access to something like our sacrament of confession. The conscience catches up for a good person. And I think a lot of people, like Pope Francis always visits prisons and stuff. It's going to get people thinking. and also that they're redeemed. They can be redeemed. The sins can be forgiven. Neurological, that's the latest thing. Artificial intelligence, replacing the human spirit and soul. That's for your generation. Yes, sir.
Question completely off the subject of Newman, just from your perspective in your diocese. And sometimes when you go to the east and the west side of the United States, and it's more liberal or more, there's a different sort of tribalism, I don't know what the right word is, versus when you come to the core of the United States. Do you see that? And how do in your diocese, how do they imagine people here? Any kind of thing?
No, that's a good question. I said that when I got off the plane and drove through town, and I said, it's great to be in a place where people are normal and healthy, and that you were able to build a beautiful church and chapel like this.
Well, I don't mean it like, I know I'm serious. I want to ensure that we maintain community and communion with all of our brothers and sisters, and so I see the harmful effects of that, sort of that distancing there. What your thoughts are?
Well, I think it's because families here hand on what is right, hand on guidelines. You have a whole culture, a society here that's so different than ours because it's all reinforced. The church reinforces the school, which reinforces the home, and the politicians in response to that stand up for these common values and things here. Whereas with us, the media and certain people with a lot of influence so change the public voice that for anyone to speak against that, you're immediately branded a discriminator. That's the new word. If you don't agree in same-sex marriage, you're discriminating against the rights. So all this kind of vocabulary has grown up that puts people of faith at a great disadvantage in the public square, which wasn't the case before. So we have to think of, one, new and ingenious ways to explain our faith, to make it convincing to the children that are in our sphere of influence, come to our schools or catechism class or confirmation or parishes, and try and tell the other side of the story from what they're getting from the culture in California. And second, this will be even harder, we're going to have a lot more Mother Teresa's and Pope Francis's that live an austere, exemplary, heroic Christian life that will get people to then listen to what we have to say. Mother Teresa was invited to be a speaker at Harvard graduation because she lived so austerely and gave her whole life in such an extraordinary way. If we want people to listen to us, we have to have those kind of credentials. But I try and tell kids and say, well, why are you against what the Supreme Court of the United States has decreed is okay, that same-sex marriage is a right? And why is your church against it? And you're obviously discriminating against gay people. And I said, well, using what Thomas More said, if Congress and the Supreme Court should pass a law saying that the world is flat, would that make the world flat? Do they have that power to change nature? Second, I say, kids are all into all organic, everything natural. Seriously. And the Pope in Laudato Si is on, we need another encyclical following Laudato Si, which takes those principles and then applies it to the human person. That just as it's disrespectful of God to pollute the environment, and I think it is, to ruin the planet carelessly, so it is to ruin our bodies with chemicals or to interfere in natural processes of the body, like in vitro fertilization or transgender, things like that. So if you go in their doors and you just have them come out your door, start in with the principles they agree in, and then say, no, okay, apply those to the human body. Oh, no, that's different. No. You're saying we must follow nature's and nature's rules. And they are. We're only going to eat granola. And I go back to the Jesuit high school in San Francisco where I lived for 12 years, and you go to throw away something, there are 5 different waste baskets, all a different color. And I'm trying to figure out which one is a trash goes in. Plastic, metal, you know, that's the other compost. Okay, take that kind of attention to natural detail and now apply it to us, God's greatest creature. All those rights you want to give animals and protection, apply it to us and to children in the womb. They say, oh, the Supreme Court has decided. Yeah, but the Supreme Court also said that black people were not full human beings. You can obey the Supreme Court then, you know, in the 19th century. Those are the kind of things I use, but it's very hard. We were taught, you know, I was looking at some statistics, half kids that leave the Catholic Church have already decided to by the 8th grade. And even before a lot of kids come to our confirmation program. The parents do not go to Mass. The kids do not go to Mass. They wanted the kids to make confirmation as a, you know, like a bar mitzvah, it's a step. They drop the kids off to the class, they do the class. The kids get confirmed. A number of kids that I've just confirmed at Mass come up to communion like this. Don't take communion, I said with the priest. I've just conferred them the sacrament of the Holy Spirit, yet they don't receive communion, you know, because they haven't been going to Mass and confession. Oh my God, what a contradiction. You shouldn't be making your confession. You know, we see it right away. But we got an awful lot of work to do. You know, a lot of kids, after they're confirmed, they never come back to Mass. They can just say, I got my certificate. We got a lot of work. We're trying our hardest. Also, another reason I think kids fall away is the Masses are so boring and so just dumbed down. They're not. Pope Francis has said very little on the liturgy, but one thing he did say at a homily he gave on the Feast of the Transfiguration. He said every Mass should be an experience of the Transfiguration, where you experience the glory of God, and you know not whether you're on heaven or on earth. What the apostles said. Yeah, so our music, the building of a church like this, is an exact following of what Pope Francis said there. You come here, wow, this is it.
Bishop Barber, thank you.
Thank you very much.